My name is Jan Holm. I'm with Montana Elders for a Livable Tomorrow, MELT, the group that's putting on this event. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and thanks to Molly for making this possible. So why is our group doing this? It's because we have members who are smoke jumpers, firemen. One wrote a book on natural disasters. I was an emergency incident medical specialist on wildfires. And we just thought it was important, given what happened last year. It's still current in people's memories. Also, why do it so early? Well, open burning started last weekend. If you have open burning to do, do call the health department before you burn. And there are things you can do before the wildfire season arrives, starting now, especially now as the melting is beginning. Oh, please turn off your cell phones if you haven't. I have some requests to you. There will be a person coming around with 3x5 cards and pencils, and please take one of each or two cards, a pencil. Write down questions as they occur to you. We have a full schedule for this event tonight, and will not be taking questions and answers at the end of the session, but we will collect your questions in that turquoise box there and put them all together and answer them and send them out in a group email. So put your email address and your question down, and we will get back to you within the week. Let's see. If you're interested or know somebody who's interested in going to another one of these events, probably 2 in a row would be too much, there is an event happening on March 11th in Bonner at the Our Savior Lutheran Church. That's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There's another one on the 21st of March happening at the Grant Creek Best Western, and that one is at 7 o'clock at night. There is also one happening April 12th in Stevensville at the Public Library. So, and people are contacting us saying that they want to hold these events. If you find that your neighborhood might be interested, an event can happen there. Okay, Joe Toth, city fireman and battalion chief, recently retired, is going to be your MC until the very end when I'll return. Joe, you're on.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here this evening. One of the pleasures we do have is this is being recorded by MCAT. We'd like to thank them very much for putting it for the media assistance grant donated to MELT by MCAT. A couple of things, but we're really interested in tonight is you getting some information that's germane to your home or a neighborhood that you live in the wildland-urban interface or other places too. And we've got a lot of good information for you tonight, so I'm not going to talk a lot up here about things. We're going to start with a film tonight. Just really quick note, there are some of the things we're not covering tonight have to do with the policies of wildfire around us, fighting the fires, not fighting the fires, forest service, thinning the forest, logging the forest, any of that. What we're interested in is your home and the ways that you can make your home survive a wildfire. And so that's our focus tonight, and hope you learned something and can take that and share it with your neighbors. So this first thing we're going to do is it's a film called Unacceptable Risk. It was filmed in Colorado, but it applies to almost all the
So this is an attention getter and a context giver.
When you're getting kind of right up close to the fire and really kind of intimate with the fire, and you're digging, your head's down and you're scratching line, you're down in the dirt and you're working and sweating and it's hot and it's hard to breathe and you're choking because of the smoke, your eyes are burning and you're just right up against it, and you look up and there are fire whirls, which are like a tornado of fire, literally. And these fire whirls are 6 feet around, and they're almost 70 feet tall. They're as tall as a tree. It's just a moment that you're terrified and in awe all at the same time, because there's nothing there in your experience to help you to really grasp the gravity of the situation that you're in right then.
Back out! God, this shit's too up! Hey, back out, back out, back out!
What they are seeing is scary. What they are seeing is not what they're used to at all, and that's terrifying.
Colorado used to be considered, we called it the asbestos state, because it just was not a significant fire environment state. And in the last 10 years, that significantly changed. In 2010, we had the 4 Mile Fire. Within 2 years of the 4 Mile Fire, the record for most destructive fires was eclipsed twice. And since then, it's been eclipsed, I think, 2 more times.
10-day fires, 4-day fires, 3-day fires, that was kind of the norm. Not 2-week, 3-week, 2-month, all summer long.
We're being confronted and asked to suppress or battle fires that didn't exist 20 years ago. The Hayman Fire from 2002 is, in my opinion, probably one of the best indicators of the impacts of climate change along the Front Range of Colorado here. We had not seen large plume-dominated fires. We had what we called one-day wonders. When it was windy, the fire would grow, but when the wind stopped, the fire would basically go out. Hayman Fire was not like that.
When we were on the Hayman Fire, watching, a 5-mile run through the canopy, and just knowing that that's not what's supposed to happen.
While there are many reasons from that, it comes down to talking about drought-stressed trees, lack of spring moisture, and higher than normal temperatures. And those combined created and signaled really a shift in the fire environment along the Front Range.
We saw fire behavior we haven't seen before. And little did we know that was the precursor to what we're seeing today. And it's become the new norm.
Respond to 7100 4 Mile Canyon Drive for trees that are caught on fire, 1003.
I got a page letting me know there's a new fire start in 4 Mile Canyon in Emerson Gulch. I got the page at the same time one of my best friends, Rod Moraga, got the page.
I got a page for the fire, and jokingly, said to my wife, it's the big one, and kind of laughed and said, I'll see you in an hour, something like that.
And I walked out the door and was like, holy smokes, this thing is going to go big. Rod lives there, had a pretty narrow view of the fire, and was focused immediately on how do we put it out.
What I think was a microburst just came down on us, probably 30, 40 miles an hour, and that fire just fanned and probably tripled in size within 15 minutes. The conditions were extreme, and I was very scared.
I've never been in a situation before where I've been that surrounded by fire, where we were literally going house to house trying to protect property, trying to save structures. I, at one point, had an engine that was assigned to my crew wanting to turn the assignment down.
I was absolutely convinced people were going to die.
Somewhere during the day, I started thinking about my house. What was ironic was that I had assigned all the fire engines, and there were no more fire engines. So I basically just watched until it hit my house, and then I just turned around and left because I didn't really, there was not much else to do. When we see fuel loads that have increased over time, when we see weather and climatology that has gone to extremes, we don't have a fire season. We have a year-round fire season, and any month of the year is conducive to wildfire.
On October 9th in 2012, I was dispatched to a fire in Rocky Mountain National Park. That right there is an outlier. It's a novel event. Rocky Mountain National Park does not have fires in October. The risk to firefighters was high. The costs were high to suppress the fire against a less than 1% chance that the fire was actually going to do anything. We decided to back off, let the fire kind of do its own thing for another week or two. Season-ending event would come in, and the fire would go out. So nearly 2 months later, the fire was still going, and strong winds came up one night and pushed the fire 3 miles in the night. At night, in practically December. Throughout the night, we're still having active, intense fire. Temperatures aren't cooling off as much.
I think that the fire environment is changing so dramatically and so dynamically because of our environment in general. They're faster moving, more destructive, they're more volatile. There are fires that have burned downhill over long stretches, which kind of flies in the face of convention because fire wants to move uphill.
On a day-to-day basis, we're being surprised. And in this business, surprise is what kills people.
From where I live in Northside Colorado Springs, I got a good view right at the fire area. Initially, I was having a hard time grasping what I was looking at. We had a thermal collapse of this conductive column of superheated air and gas and smoke, and it had enveloped the large area of the community. I was in a pickup, and I started driving up these streets. I was going to roll the window down, and when I felt the radiant heat through the glass, I'm like, that's not survivable. If I take a breath of that, that's not survivable. I need to get out of here. It was chaotic. I was scared to the point of being emotional about it. I was convinced, our guys were gone. They weren't resources really anymore to me. They were, people. And so we're going to tell these people, tell that guy, you know what? You got a family, and it doesn't matter right now. You took an oath, go in there. We have a responsibility to the community. We have a responsibility to ourselves, our profession. But at what point does that no longer become viable? Plus, I have this awareness now of what this fire behavior has been for all these years. And knowing that, where does that cross over into my responsibility to go and send people to do these crazy things?
Jesus Christ.
Whoa. Watch your leg.
There it is, right here, right here. It's okay. We're out. When I came into that fire, I thought I was ready for it because of what I'd seen. But the fact of the matter is you're never really ready. Black Forest made what we were seeing that first night at a 4 Mile fire almost look small. Seeing the homes burning in these subdivisions that were already lost, seeing the devastation that had happened, watching the crews moving almost like they were out of their element. The fire was jumping, it was moving much faster than we could get in front of it. It's like being in a fog bank, only it's all smoke. You can't see the fire. You can hear it. It's out there. You know it's out there somewhere, but you don't see it. There are lists of rules, kind of rules of engagement as to how much fire you can put what kind of a resource on. And when you're looking at that much fire that you can't put any kind of a resource on it, that's an oh shit moment.
So that public can't have an expectation anymore that we are going to take firefighters and put them in front of that. It's beyond our capability to manage. We're not going to kill good people trying to save infrastructure that we put in a place that probably shouldn't be there. And so that changing this new environment, dry, arid, drought-stricken area with lots of fuel, is we're going to have to change the way we live in it. And that's where we're struggling.
Is there evidence of climate change in the fire environment? You have to say yes, because we are seeing a level of fire and an intensity of fire and a risk to firefighters that hasn't existed in the past. And every indicator is, every year it just gets worse. This summer is my 21-year-old daughter's first year on the fire line. And people always ask, are you proud? And in one sense, yes. And then in the quiet moments, it scares the crap out of me. In my 20 years, I come close to dying, and I hope that she doesn't have that. But when I look at the changing fire landscape, I worry. you know, because I can't tell her what she'll see, because she'll see stuff that I'll never see. As a society, we have to take this evidence seriously. And we've got to start confronting climate change with the same level of effort and resources and intensity that we do to fight wildland fires. Firefighters are already taking unacceptable risks.
He was already up here, so I really don't need to introduce him. I guess I'll just move along. I think that's a fairly impressive and film, and talks a lot about the stuff that could just happen right here, too. It's ironic that I don't know if anybody saw the news a couple nights ago, but there was a fire just south of Denver, Colorado here. Just this time of year, a wildfire out in the prairie, and it burned some structures. So without further ado, our keynote speaker is here tonight, and I'm really happy to have him here. And rather than take up his time talking about him, I'll let him just jump right into it. So please welcome Jack Cohen.
Thanks, Joe. This is going to be an interesting logistics effort here. Especially moving, yeah, you know, I may pull this in just a second if there are too many of my gaps. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about are houses burning down during wildfires. You saw the context of firefighters and the difficulty with which they are facing during the extreme conditions. And keep in mind what you just saw in the video so that it adds context as I go along. By the way, how many of you saw when the houses were burning, trees around the houses not burning at the same time? Okay? Huh? Does that give you kind of at least a question about what's going on? Okay, moving on. So what I'm going to talk about are many homes and businesses burning to total destruction during a wildfire. But first, let's get a sense of the reality of wildfire. First of all, let's recognize that wildfires are inevitable, and wildfires during extreme conditions are going to be inevitable. So we don't have any choice about eliminating wildfires. And let's also face the reality that fire during appropriate conditions is a principal factor in the sustainability of our ecosystems. The way they got to be the way they were when European discovery and settlement occurred was with a lot of fire across the board, all the way from prairies to the wet forests in Oregon and Washington. And so, ironically, we need more fire, not less fire, but not during the conditions that they're occurring now. Because right now, de facto, we are essentially managing to have fire only during the extreme conditions, because that's when it overwhelms us. So, does that mean that wildland urban fire is inevitable? And my answer to that is no. Well, so what I'm talking about here is being able to achieve the state of where home destruction can be prevented without necessarily eliminating or controlling wildfire. Well, so that probably doesn't exactly jive with your perceptions. So what is our perception of wildfire, and particularly wildfire related to home destruction? Well, here's an example. the firestorm descended like a dragon from hell on the foothill neighborhoods and laid them to waste. That's one of our perspectives. Not much we can do about dragons from hell. The wildfire swept through the community with a tsunami of flame. We can't do much about tsunamis either. And the last example, the wildfire literally exploded houses in flames, leaving destruction in its path. It was like a war zone. And I am way beyond tolerating war zone kinds of analogies when I read it in the newspaper or I'm hearing it on CNN. It doesn't work this way. So let's take a look at patterns of destruction, particularly what isn't consumed around that destruction, and see what it indicates about how homes ignite and burn. So let's go 1993 to Laguna Beach up on the hill above Emerald Bay, and we see the one house unprotected that survived. By the way, there are 4 other houses over there out of view, but let's face it, miracles only happen in ones. So this house survives, and it's called the Miracle House. Well, so what else didn't burn that's in this scene? Exactly, miracle vegetation. So let's take a look at these patterns. So here, 1980, the Stable Fire, all we see are houses burning. And this is Southern California, so there were a lot of flammable wood roofs that ignite from firebrands. And so what we see here are houses burning without vegetation actually spreading the fire to that neighborhood. We take a look at Los Alamos, and we see total destruction surrounded by green vegetation. This is a block inside Los Alamos away from the edge. We take a look at another scene from Los Alamos, and we see total destruction with green vegetation. Let's take a look at what these houses and the rest of the block looked like during that event. So here we are in a helicopter looking down on the street burning, one side of the street, not the other. And this is about 2 hours after the high-intensity wildfire had spread roughly parallel to the community about a half a mile up the hill from here. The fire that ignited these structures, and notice the not burning trees as well as the houses across the street. These houses ignited from surface fire spreading continuously through pine needle fuel beds on the surface to spread and contact the structures which were burning at that time. Keep in mind that this isn't the only area that's burning at that particular time. All of northwest Los Alamos was under siege and was taking all the resources. So this is what it tends to look like. This is Missionary Ridge in 2002, not Los Alamos, but this tends to be what it looks like when the houses that you saw just prior ignite and burn. So here's a scene. This is in Colorado. This is a before, and this is an after. The forest isn't really the thing that's burning in terms of high intensity. It's the surface fire that's burning through the area. In this particular case, this is what you might call an appropriate fire spread condition, except that it was continuous with the cabin, which ignited and burned. You should get the idea from this that under appropriate situation, particularly in this kind of a type where surface fire is the norm, our houses are actually more flammable and less resilient in the condition that they're typically in now than the forests. So let's go to South Lake Tahoe. And we've got the Angora fire spreading high intensity down Angora Creek. So it spreads at about 2:30 past this area, and off of the flank of that, we have fire spread going on the surface through an area that had actually been thinned. So it's Jeffrey pine, which is like ponderosa pine. It spread continuously to a line of houses here that ignited, and then from the burning material, the firebrands, the lofted embers, into the community, and the community continued to spread the fire more than an hour after the wildfire had ceased its activity in that general area. Okay, so get the sense that what's going on here is essentially our communities are spreading the fire through the community. So we look at a scene like this, same thing. Total destruction, lots of unconsumed vegetation. We go 2009, we see the Victoria fires, 173 civilian fatalities, the eucalypt forest, gasoline on a stick, and yet we see the same kind of pattern of unconsumed canopy and total destruction. Lots of spotting, significantly severe conditions. 2-3% relative humidity, 20, 30 mile an hour winds, and eucalyptus. And eucalyptus is primarily bark strips that ignite and fly for miles. Waldo Canyon. In this scene, all we see are houses burning. The wildfire has long since ceased its activity at the edge of mountain shadows. Now we see for hours the fire spreading through the community. In this case, we would call this an urban conflagration. Roaring Lion, same kind of pattern. So what do unconsumed vegetation and homes adjacent to total destruction indicate to us? Well, it indicates that intense simultaneous heating across wide areas of structures is not occurring. It's a very local kind of phenomena. What we're seeing is that the ignitions are principally determined by the local conditions. In this particular case, look how local. There's nothing burned around it except for the structure. So in this particular case, it was definitely firebrands that dropped in and ignited either directly on the house or something, the mulch up against the wood wall at the base. So we look at a fire like Roaring Lion. We see a huge smoke column. We see significant flames here at the base, big flames. And it's counterintuitive for us to look at that scale of fire and recognize that it's very local conditions that are doing the ignitions, that this situation is not heating something long distances away, and it's not. So wildfire doesn't spread through a community like a lava flow, a flash flood, or a tsunami that explodes houses in flame, leaving total destruction in its wake. And also, the total destruction is not indicative of high-intensity exposures. What we see here, we're looking through 4 houses that were there at green canopy surrounding the structures. So although initiated by intense wildfires, it's the firebrands and surface fires within the community that typically ignite the homes. Commonly, communities burned by fire spreading through residential fuels, the vegetation and structures within the communities and homes ignite and burn hours after significant wildfire activity has ceased at the community edge. So it's the community, in essence, that's continuing the fire spread and the home destruction. The community continues to burn without the wildfire. So let's take a look at an example of that. This is on a fire called Grass Valley, one of the lesser fires in 2007 that I happened to be on. And the fire spread through Chaparral, primarily Chaparral. This was up in the San Bernardino Mountains. And the fire got to the edge of the community at about 9:30, sometime between 9:30 and 10. The photo time is 12:20. That definitely I know. And so most of the houses in this scene have already totally consumed, and they may be smoldering, but essentially they're finished burning. The houses that you see burning, it takes them about 40 minutes between heavily involved with fire to getting to that situation. So that's burning on the order of 2 hours after the initial spread to the community. Let's take a look about a half a mile into the community at this area within the rectangle. And what we see are houses on both sides of the midsection here that are burning pretty much in the same state that we saw those other houses. Now, this is a half a mile from where the edge of the community is. And if we look closer, we see houses that are just beginning to get flame involvement from a smoldering combustion, a smoldering ignition. As it turns out, every one of the houses in this scene ended up being totally destroyed. How many fire apparatus do you see in the picture? Why do you think that might be? Safety? Number one, this is well inside the community of dense housing, and the slopes are on the order of 100%. Those are 3-story houses, okay, that are entered at street level. Number two, they're off on the edges, trying to keep the fire from the rest of the community up the hill and downwind, okay? More houses than there are firefighters. So how is it that small ignitions, local conditions, are resulting in hundreds, if not thousands, of houses being destroyed? So let's start with severe conditions. We're talking about adequate fuels, high continuity, particularly with the high intensities. We're talking about canopy fuels, either shrub fuels, woody fuels, shrubs, and particularly conifers. So now we've got severe conditions. We've got low relative humidities, and we've got high winds. Then, given an ignition, we end up with extreme fire behavior, and that fire behavior overwhelms firefighters. And then, particularly with the generation of firebrands downwind and vulnerable houses, ignition vulnerable houses, we start seeing simultaneous ignitions of structures, at which point we are not only overwhelmed by the wildfire, we are now overwhelmed by the houses. It is not unusual at all to have one engine company for 10 to 25 houses. In Southern California, where I served for 10 years, it was not unusual at all to have 25-to-1 kind of ratios. And yet, we're talking about a location where there are more available resources to dispatch than anywhere probably in the galaxy. And so when the resources are overwhelmed, as well as for safety considerations, then the effectiveness of suppression goes to zero because they can't engage. Nobody's there. Any ignition results in total destruction, and we have the wildland urban fire disaster. So wildfire overwhelms us during the extreme conditions, and about 2% of the time we fail to control at initial attack. And it is under the extreme conditions or the severe conditions when we get overwhelmed. And not coincidentally, it is those exact conditions of extreme fire behavior when our disasters occur. Obviously not every fire, but the disasters, and I define that arbitrarily as over 100 houses or greater, are totally destroyed. Those events only occur during the extreme conditions. Well, so how do we attempt to protect structures during wildfires? Well, like this. This is what we use. We use fire suppression, basically, and structure protection. We use retardant planes, we use helicopters, we use engines, we use dozers, right? And they fail 2% of the time. So our approach is failing, and the result are the disasters. So the inevitability of extreme wildfire conditions and our inability to control extreme wildfires suggesting the inevitability of wildland-urban fire disasters. However, what did we see from all those photos of destruction surrounded by unconsumed vegetation? Home ignition during extreme wildfires is primarily determined by local conditions of the structure and its immediate surroundings. So if we go back to the sequence and let's just assume for the moment, we'll go through this shortly, but for now, let's say, oh, well, we've got houses, we've got an extreme wildfire, but those houses are ignition resistant. Well, if they're ignition resistant, then many of them are not going to ignite. They will be what we call standalone. And the ignitions that do occur are more in parity with our resources, our available resources responding. So what does that mean? We don't get overwhelmed in our response, which means that our tactics are successful and we have avoided the wildland-urban fire disaster. We still have the extreme wildfire. We haven't controlled the wildfire in this sequence. That's still here. What we've done is we've prevented the wildland-urban fire disaster. Okay? We don't have a choice over getting rid of the wildfire. We do have a choice over not having our houses burned. Because if homes don't ignite, homes don't burn. Aren't you glad you came for that? If homes don't burn, wildland-urban fire disasters don't happen, and if wildland-urban fire disasters don't happen, we don't have the inevitable disaster. We can prevent home ignitions during extreme wildfires. Yes, we can. So let me just very quickly indicate that a considerable amount of research using modeling computations, computers, experiments and examinations separately to make sure that we understand and verify our computations. And the results of that are that the characteristics of a home in relation to its immediate surroundings within 100 feet principally determine home ignitions during extreme wildfires. And that 100 feet is readily mitigatable. And I call this area the home ignition zone. And if you go to firewise.org, the website, or many other websites, you will see this term home ignition zone. And it refers to this area about 100 feet from all around the house, roughly, that principally determines the ignitions of the structure, with emphasis, with priority on the conditions of the home. And we'll see something about that. This is an example of not necessarily a model for. You don't have to live in that house. You don't have to do exactly what they did. This is just an example of a very high-intensity fire that went diagonally across the scene, and the house survived. And note, a little bit of a wake thanks to that clearing and the resistant house. So let's take a look at some examples of experiments, because it's fun to watch. So here we are in Northwest Territories of Canada, where I was doing among about 22 other scientists doing crown fire experiments. And one of the things that I did had to do with looking at home ignitions, and particularly looking at high-intensity flames and how close do those flames have to be in order to ignite a wood wall. So here we have a wood wall. It's at 33 feet from the forest edge, where the crown fire is going to burn up to the edge. And the fire guard out here is cleared. This is about 100 feet in this particular case. And note that it's full of, it still has quite a bit of woody debris, and we see real-time ignitions occurring from firebrands. We did many experiments, and what you see there, sort of those mannequins, the clothing sticks, are looking at personal protection equipment. We also did fire shelters and all kinds of things. But the important point here is that the crown fire came up 33 feet from the wall section, and it didn't ignite the wall section. It scorched it, but it didn't ignite it. Now, interestingly enough, with all the fire spreading around on the surface, I had cleared around the wall section about 2 feet, because it's a no-brainer. If I've got flame contact, it's very likely to ignite. Well, the results of that were that 3 out of 7 wall sections did not ignite at 33 feet, and no walls scorched significantly at 66 feet and beyond. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean you can stand there. Okay? And why would that be? Because I am significantly more sensitive to the heating, the radiant heating, to cause pain and injury on my exposed skin than what it takes to ignite something. So I'm getting burned by the same exposure that it takes over 27 minutes to ignite the wood, which means that the fire is somewhere else at that point. So our perception is very much from pain and injury, not necessarily what it takes to ignite something. So what this did, one of the things that this did, was it confirmed that 100-foot estimate, which was an overestimate from the modeling, actually was reasonable. And that's where the 100 feet comes from. So let's take a look at some other examples where I'm emphasizing firebrands. So here from the right, the Crown Fire is coming through. This is Rodeo Chetasky Fire in 2002 in Arizona. And it's coming in from the right, and it gets to the residential street. It's about 40 feet from canopy to canopy. There is obviously Crown Fire coming up to the edge where there are structures, but no Crown Fire going across, spreading across the street, and yet every structure was totally destroyed for another 3 blocks in this particular situation due to firebrands. Flames don't leap over, firebrands do. A shower, a blizzard of firebrands in this case, exposed into that community. So firebrands that cause ignitions commonly travel a half a mile or more during extreme wildfire conditions, depending on the type of vegetation that is burning. And in our particular situation, if it's tree canopies, conifer tree canopies, they produce a huge amount of firebrands. But so do structures. So here we have an example of a flammable wood roof in Southern California igniting in multiple places. There is no high intensity anywhere close to that area. The structure is burning before anything else. So when the structures start burning, particularly in any kind of a community of density, a couple of houses per acre to maybe 1 house every acre or so, we start having the community contributing to its own spread from the firebrands. So this is an example of firebrands. Note that the winds are calm at this point, and the firebrands are being contributed by 2 burning houses. This is Southern California in 2003. And you can see the size of the firebrands coming out of the houses. When they hit something, they shatter and go into smaller sparks. By the way, that truck was delivering, this is about 12:30 at night, and it was delivering lunches that ignited in the open bed. So they had hot lunches. So let's take a look at a demonstration we did at the IBHS Research Center. And what you're seeing here is a demonstration of where there is no flame exposure, convection or radiation. This house is not being heated. It's only being exposed to a shower of firebrands. So what we have is no pointer. So we've got metal gutters, vinyl gutters, pine needles in the gutters, pine needles in the roof valley. We've got fiber cement, like hardy plank, and vinyl and composition board. mulch all the way around. This is pine, what they call in the South pine straw. So these are pine needles and bark mulch. And note, this is real time, and note how the firebrands have generated the fire that's at and on the house. So this is how it's happening. Now, it doesn't take very much to get the bark mulch and the pine needles away from the base of the house, and it doesn't take much, not really, to get the pine needles out of your gutters. Now, interestingly enough, if we look at this fire on the roof, we would say, oh, well, that might be a problem, and yet this roof was composition shingles, and they did not ignite and spread fire, nor did they penetrate. That's not exactly a recommendation for your composition shingle roof, but it didn't ignite the house. So let's take, again, another look at firebrands. In this case, we're back in California in 1993 in the Mariposa fire, and we've got a broom that's ignited. If nobody's there, potentially the broom starts smoldering combustion on the house, and then it ignites the house. If nobody's there, it burns to complete destruction. Based on that, we did a demonstration in the lab of 2 brooms that ignited from our exposure. So let's take a look at some examinations that I did. So here we're on a fire where an interview with an engine crew basically said there was high intensity that occurred. They had to disengage for safety reasons, and they were convinced that high intensity was what ignited all the structures, okay, from the flames. And yet when we take a look at the scene, we see that the nearest house is about 100 feet away from that high-intensity burning, but its split-rail fence, and particularly the post, is about 45 feet. And it's the closest point, and if we take a closer look at that post, we see no char. Now, the leaves on the roses and other shrubs are scorched, but that's the same exposure that creates pain and injury on my exposed skin, not ignite something. So how can this house ignite from the same, from actually a less exposure, certainly not convection, flame contact, it would be radiation, if something closer is not scorched at all? Well, so from an archive of photos, we found that actually that house ignited way after from fire spread in the community to that house, not from what was burning high intensity. So let's take a look at this situation and ask the question, what's the primary problem here, other than housekeeping? So we have pine needles in the valley, roof valley, and we've got pine needles in the gutters. So from the demonstration, what we saw were pine needles in the valleys that actually burned, but what the problem is that the burning pine needles 40 seconds after the shower starts are burning in the gutters and puts flame right up against the eave line. And this is the result, an example in one of the fires. So it burns in the gutters, it starts the eave on fire and then penetrates into the attic. That photo is compliments of some pretty gutsy protection action. But on the same house, just on the other side, is where the pine needles burned off the roof without ever igniting the structure. So one of the things that we did in Northwest Territories was to load up a roof on one of the structures we had to expose and just did a prescribed burn off the top of the roof. to demonstrate. Well, so 6 weeks earlier, I was in Los Alamos. This is obviously 2000. So I'm in Los Alamos on May 13th, and what I saw was this kind of situation going on in many of the houses that did not have rain gutters, but did have pine needles on the roof. Maybe not as extensive as what we did there. So this is where we have problems. We have pine needles, we have a composition shingle roof. Well, that's not necessarily a big problem if we want to repair the roof. But what we've got then is a vertical wall. In a complex roof design or dormers, we've got a vertical wall. And in this case, it happens to be wood shingles. And it's easy to ignite from that debris. In essence, what we have here is essentially a wood shingle wall that goes to the surface of the ground with pine needles, okay? And we can look at the same thing with our dormers. Or we can look at a chimney chase, a chimney box, in this case cedar, that comes up, and what we have is that cedar coming right down to the roof line. We can see that it was flashed for moisture, but there's no relief, no separation of that wood from the surface where the firebrands can accumulate. We see composition shingle damage, but again, complements of fire protection. And this is what happens when fire protection can't get to it. So decks, what's the big problem with decks? Well, not the large dimensional material. Okay, when the fire burned out on the surface, it could not sustain. But when we look closer, what we see is this damage. Now, this was protected, and this is the area where it occurred. And what we see is patio furniture. We're looking at flammable cushions, and we're looking through the burned out back of one cushion and see that the seat was burned up on the other. That could have ignited the structure and totally destroyed it without protection. Let's take a look. This is a house in Roaring Lion, and the general consensus before was that it was from the wildfire. And somehow or another, the flame exposure did it. But when we look at what the exposure was from the wildfire, it was not high intensity. Nor was it the wood pile that was about 30 feet away or so down below. And the reason we can say that is because all the facing surfaces are not scorched. So it couldn't have been ignited either from flame contact or from radiation. So we talked to the homeowner after we saw that the deck, that the firebrand shower was evident. There were scorch marks from firebrands all over the deck. And we asked, so what was at this location? And it was a bag of charcoal briquettes next to the smoker with a plastic bottle of lighter fluid, which then, so the bag is burning, it's, craft paper, it melts the plastic bottle, which then the accelerant runs all, across the deck and then down the post. So how bad are decks? Well, not as bad as what we've got on decks. So understanding how homes ignite during extreme wildfire shows us how local ignition conditions of the HIZ principally determine those home ignitions. By eliminating ignition vulnerabilities within the HIZ, we can prevent home destruction and wildland urban fire disasters. However, there's always a however. Who owns it? We do. Typically, with little exception, the home ignition zone is private property. It's owned by us. Now, in higher densities, it might be more than one homeowner. That doesn't change the physics, but it certainly changes the social dynamics. So where you have the urban conflagrations, Coffee Park, Santa Rosa, California, September 2017, almost 1,200 houses totally destroyed. Property line setbacks, at least on one side, about 5 feet. That's an urban conflagration. It was initiated by the wildfire that at its closest point was a little over a quarter of a mile away, and it continued. So homeowners have to take responsibility to match their authority. That's not a statement, a moral judgment statement. That's a statement of equalizing the authority with the responsibility. Nobody else can go onto your property and do your housekeeping. So we homeowners have to engage in reducing our home's ignitability to effectively prevent wildland urban fire disasters. So making our homes ignition resistant means having extreme wildfires without wildland urban disasters. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jack. That was very educational. I think I've seen some of this before, and I learn more and more every time I see it. Bringing it kind of close to home then is we want to continue going here with some examples of not only can this happen anywhere, and you saw Jack's research that's taken him all over the world, is bringing it close to home here. We have lucky enough tonight to have with us Patty Garbett, and she is the one that is responsible, if you happen to notice the pictures on the way in, and we have some posters and flyers around that have the same pictures, and so Patty's going to talk to us about last year's Livable Peak Fire and her home and how it survived.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. Last summer, in August of 2017, a portion of the Livable Peak Fire moved downhill right up to my house with a profuse, intense ember shower. And what I'd like to do this afternoon is share with you the story of what I have done with my house and how it survived, and a little bit about some tools that you might use to use these same techniques on your own house. So if you can imagine, use your imagination, my 2 acres, uphill is timber, downhill is grass, and my house is right in the middle. So my house is fire resistant, shingles, siding, deck, all metal fencing on my property. What can burn on my property? Ponderosa pine, Doug fir, grass. What did I do about that? Every single tree on my property, the whole 2 acres, my home ignition zone, every single tree is limbed up at least 10 feet. I started planting perennial grasses to replace annual grasses. Perennial grasses are more fire resistant. They've seeded out in August when it's really hot and dry here, and I mowed every single bit of that perennial grassland down as the fire got closer. And keep a bookmark in your mind about that, because as Jack said, when the fire came, that became a very important attribute. Let's see, I also, on the trees, good to mention for folks around here, there's a pheromone treatment that you can use on your ponderosa pine trees to prevent bark beetle infestation. And I treated my trees every year to eliminate adding more fuel, more standing fuel. I also raked every single year and burned all the surface fuel on my property. I broadcast burned the grass, I burned all the debris, all the pine needles, and all my neighbors. I have wonderful neighbors. 1 person on 2 acres is good, but 8 people on 30 acres is awesome. We prescribed burn together, we limb together, we shared fire hose, information, and it's a wonderful thing, and I tell you, it does work. Another tool you might consider using is the Missoula County Rural Fire Department has a fuels crew. I did not know that. And they work on a matching cost basis. I had 7 people with a chipper and chainsaws come out. They did more work in one day than I could have done in 2 weeks. Also, when you're thinking in your imagination about my house, all the shrubbery around my house came off the Firewise fire-resistant species. So as Jack mentioned, herbaceous shrubs around your house may actually serve as a heat sink and not add energy to the fire. So continuing on, another thing that you might consider doing is consider your water source. I made a decision to put in a 2,400-gallon underground cistern that's fed off my well. And once that was in and I knew it was working and understood it, I went down to Axman here in town on the west side, and they have a whole department of people that will help you put a fire package together. I bought hose, sprinklers, a gasoline-powered pump with a draft hose that I could put in my underground cistern in case the power went out. And a really nifty thing they gave me, or let me use, was a tripod sprinkler with an adjustable radius, and I was able to put that aim water onto my roof line in an arc sufficient to encompass the ground where I kind of thought the fire might come from, and I didn't even have to get up on the roof. And that was a very, very valuable thing, and I'll tell you more about that post-fire. The last thing I want to share with you that's a really important tool is communication and coordination. I learned a lot this summer, and one of the things that I learned was you've got to tell people what you're doing, and you need to reach out to people and get all the information you can. I had my insurance agent come out to the house at least 3 times. I wrote down everything I'm telling you and called it my home protection plan. I gave a copy of that to my fire department, to my insurance agent, and I tell you what, the dialogue I had with my insurance agent was really good. He learned a lot, and so did I. So those relationships are really important. And as I mentioned, the relationships with neighbors cannot be understated. It was a tough summer, and it was a lot to go through. So let me tell you how the story ended. On August the 17th at 7:30, the Lolo Creek fire made its appearance on the hillside uphill from my house. And I will tell you guys that that was my worst fear. I had always worried in all the years I've lived in that house that that's exactly what would happen. And there I stood in my backyard looking uphill at a 40-foot flame length going, I'm ready. I have a plan. I've implemented it, and I'm ready to go. So this profuse, intense ember shower came down, and I will tell you that little thing I told you to bookmark about the grass, every single ember started a fire in the grass. But because that grass was only 1 inch high, that flaming front was probably less than half of what it would have been. It burned down to the road, and it went out. That was really, really good. Everywhere an ember landed on my roof, on my well-watered yard, on the gravel, and on my asphalt driveway, it went out. So my fire, or the fire, completely surrounded my house. When I got back after the fire passed, it looked like my house had been on a flying carpet and landed in a sea of black. There was absolutely no anything wrong with my house. No scorch, nothing. It was in perfect shape. I even still had Wi-Fi. It was unbelievable. So I would hope the one thing I can leave you with is have a plan. I had a plan. Implement your plan. I did. And I saved my house. I know I did. And I want you to know it's one of the most empowering things I've ever done. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Patty. It's really powerful testimony, and if you haven't looked at those pictures out there, happen to see them on the posters, you've got to look at them. They're posted right outside behind the table when you signed in, so on your way out. As you obviously, we're having a lot of information here tonight, so once again, I'd like to remind you to write down those questions. We will try to get to them, but because of our limited time tonight, we really don't have time for a long period of Q&A. But we do want to get that information out to you. You can see that there are a lot of people here with information. in every situation that your home is going to be different. Obviously, Patty, she had the opportunity with the water supply thing. You may not have that. You may live in an urban district where you have hydrants in the area or something like that. It's up to you as an individual to make this plan for your home, for your neighbors. And as you can hear from her testimony too, it's so important to make this a neighborhood thing, not just an individual thing. Well, we're not done yet. We've got a lot of great information for you coming up for you here, and it's kind of the guy that's really been carrying the ball in a lot of this for us. Our next speaker is Jordan Copeland from the DNRC, and he's got I don't know, a myriad of subjects to brief you on here quickly. So without further ado, here's Jordan.
Push the arrow. Yeah. All right, I think we got this figured out. Again, my name is Jordan Copeland. I work with the Department of Natural Resource and Conservation, so the DNRC, state of Montana. And this will be my 5th summer doing this job. I was on an engine crew for the previous 5 years, so I can't do the math. It's been about 10 years with the state of Montana. So with that, I have a couple talking points here with my little presentation that I have. And I had the unique opportunity to go with Jack and assess some of the homes that got burned down on the Roaring Line fire. It's very interesting, and I learned so much that day going with a subject matter expert such as Jack, and that unique opportunity really kind of ignited the fire under me to try and get out to these communities, the importance of camaraderie and trying to get people to take this into their own hands and run with it. So we have a packet here. Let me get organized. All right, so I put that we don't like juniper bushes. It's not necessarily totally true, but in a lot of cases it is, because a lot of people don't know how to take care of their juniper bushes and take care of all of the dead and dying out. I actually did a home assessment last year in Lolo, and this individual who worked for the government previously, he's been retired, and he was a firefighter, so this surprises me. I went to his house and I did a home assessment, and he had juniper bushes about 10 feet away, but they were pretty high, and I was like, I don't know, I have this unsettling feeling about them. And he told me, well, the rabbits live in them. And I was like, well, that could be an issue. Is it either your rabbits are your priority or your home? So that was kind of a funny point that I kind of took away with. Or neither, yeah. Good point there. So what happens during a home assessment? Basically, I can come out. Sometimes I can complete it in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour. Just depends on how much of a house that you have to go around and assess. Looking at the roof, obviously, Jack did a very thorough explanation of what burns down homes during these wildfire events. So you can kind of get the idea of what I'm going to come and talk to you about if you live out in the woods. And when it comes to wood piles, when it comes to your roof, when it comes to all the vegetation around your home, I'm really focusing on that 5 feet around the house, what the house is constructed of, then I go out to 30 feet, and then I go out to 100 feet. So it's pretty in-depth, and it's a conversation that I have with the homeowner as I'm walking around the house. So with these, I have this sheet in these packets, and if some of you want to take some home, or you want to take one to a neighbor or somebody that you know that lives in the woods, that'd be very beneficial for us. And you can email me at my state email, or else we have kind of a community email that I've created with my counterparts in the Forest Service and some of the rural fire departments in Missoula City Fire, and that's livingwithwildfiremt@gmail.com.
Is that in the packet, Jordan?
Yep. So we also have something new this year called Determine Your Wildfire Risk, and it's a public portal, and you can go to it now, and you can assess your own home. You input all the information. It's very interesting, and it's very has a lot of good information in it, and it provides a means for the public to access and interact with us. So you fill out your email, you fill out your name and number, and then with what you input, it comes back to us, and then we can take a look at it, and sometimes we can still come out and schedule a home visit, and we can get that conversation started. So I'll just kind of go through that. It's at our website here, dnrc.mt.gov. And like I said, it's a really good way to come out and get involved with your community, start at your house, and then influence your neighbors to try and get on board with this program, or just come out and do a home assessment. So I'm just going to skim through these really quick. Like I said, the interaction tool, I think, is very beneficial to a lot of our communities around here. Smart 911 is another very crucial and important. It's another sheet within our packet that we have here, and it's really easy to sign up for. You just go online, or else you can call, and we have our little pamphlet here. You can call the number, and they will sign you up, and basically, like I said, it's reverse 911, and they will call or text you if there's an emergency like a wildfire that's coming through, so you can get notified right away. So that's a very good way to get the news out on some kind of an event like that. And security is their top priority, and that's through Missoula County DES. And a lot of these counties are starting to develop these things around our state. So you decide what you want to include, only seen if you call 911 too, and the industry-leading security. So it's going around the nation. Another one of those sheets that I have in there is that fire-resistant plants for Montana landscapes. It doesn't have any pictures in there. We're currently working on that right now. I'm actually going to a meeting in Bozeman this next week, and they're coming out with a publication that has a little more extensive plant lists on there, and then more pictures, so we can get a better idea of what we can plant around our home that's not going to start on fire from an ember. Another pamphlet, one of my favorite, is Be Ember Aware, and this just paints the perfect picture of what Jack's talking about, and it just reiterates what we're looking at here and what we're dealing with. And this is my favorite picture. What do you have right around your home? Jack and I were on the Roaring Line again, and I remember number 19 was a car window, and it was a very high chance that one of these car windows right next to, let me back up real quick. So the car was either in the garage or right outside the garage, but the windows were down. You get an ember that lands inside the car on the meshy seats, starts a fire, starts the car on fire, chain reaction starts the house on fire. Everything gets destroyed. So all these little fire points are awesome, I think, in my opinion, in what we can do around our home. An examination of home destruction. So this is Jack Cohen's very own publication on the Roaring Line fire that he wrote up. Very interesting, really good read. And if you want to pass it on, we do have a link inside the packet to it too, so it's a PDF that you can email. Ready, Set, Go was the other one. It's another really good publication where it does cover home ignition zone, but also what you need to cover when it comes to getting ready to evacuate and leave your home while a wildfire is in the area. So then we get on to cost share and financial assistance, and it is available, but I try to emphasize only after you take care of your home ignition zone. And a lot of people don't understand that point of it. They're like, well, we need to thin the forest. We need to do this to our forests and cut down trees to eliminate the fire spread. And obviously, even with some of the fuel reduction areas, we get low-intensity ground fire. We get embers. We get, even with the Roaring Line fire, they were saying that a lot of that area with, let me think, just with what they were doing with some of these fuel reduction areas, fire can still come and blow straight through those areas. So like I said, the home first, home out, and then we worry about those things after. So in this area, we have the Bitterroot RC&D, and that covers Missoula County, Mineral County, Ravalli County. We have the Swan Valley connections, so you're getting up towards Lake County in some cases, and some of the Swan Valley up by Sealy. The Clearwater Resource Council, that's also kind of that Sealy area too. And then the Blackfoot Challenge up the Blackfoot Corridor by Ovando and Potomac. And then we have, local fire departments, like we heard earlier, Frenchtown Rural Fire District, they do kind of a cost share, so you'd have to call your local fire department, see what they have available. Missoula Rural also. So all these moving factors, all these moving pieces are very crucial. The one that I really want to emphasize is fire-wise communities, fire-adapted communities, whatever you want to really call it, but we call it fire-wise communities, where these communities are getting involved and they're doing everything that they can to work together as a community and try and take that risk of wildfire away by all preparing their homes. They all have these debris cleanup days and all these community events, and they all work together. And that's what we're trying to do in the community, in this community in Missoula. You hear about Bend, Oregon, how they're all on board with these issues. So if we get these sparks around these different neighborhoods that we have, that's kind of what we're fighting for here, and we want to compete with those people over in Bend, Oregon, or in Washington that are already on board, and try and do a lot of good things. So that's about all that I have for right now. Thank you so much for showing up. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordan. I'd like to emphasize again that we have a ton of information in those packets, so we'd highly encourage everybody to pick up a packet we put together on that. There are a great number of websites out there that you can go to to also get some of this information. An interesting one that Jack even chose part of his research on, if you wanted to go to yourself, is called disastersafety, all one word, .org. I think it's part of that home insurance organization, but it has it shows some of the demonstrations and stuff that they do in there with on wildfires. And you go to disaster safety and you go to the wildlands section of that website, and it's got some really interesting demonstrations where they do this in a lab type of setting and show that these things can be prevented, and you can mitigate stuff around your very own home if you want to do the work. Is that about it then, John? I was trying to tell us about the information. We already talked about the other upcoming events, and we highly encourage, if you know somebody that couldn't be here tonight or not a Mile member, to come to one of these. All the local fire jurisdictions are working on this, so again, go to the information. Some of you live in the city, some in the Missoula Rural Fire District, some outlying, and so you have to find out from your individual jurisdiction about what help may be available for financial assistance for mitigating things on your property. And so without further ado, I think I'll pass it back to Jan.
Oh, yeah. In the packet, there is a list of questions that you should ask your insurance agent. Some things just telling you what you need to keep a record of, and the idea that keeping all of these records, if you go through your house and take videos of them, don't keep that video in your house. Keep it somewhere else. Anyway, that kind of information is in the packet. I really want to have a little bit of time for neighborhoods to get together and talk, but just a few things I need to mention beforehand. One of the big things that I get out of looking at Be Ember Aware is that wherever you see leaves gathering, you also will see embers gathering. They sort of hit the same spots. And Patty talked a lot about neighbors working together. If you can get your neighbors to join with you in pursuing this, it's just so great. You have little kids who can do raking and bagging stuff for you. You have younger adults who can go up and take out the screws on the vents and put in an 1/8-inch mesh screen so the embers don't go through those vents that you've got that are up high. And, you know, you have people who know how to use a saw and limb those trees. And we're hoping to do something good to help you out with where all of that debris goes, but it hasn't happened yet, so I can't go any more than say that it's being worked on. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to, except Jack came over and said, do you have time for a Q&A? Not really, because I want to get you together with your neighbors, but please take a minute while I'm getting the signs to write down any question that you want to ask, Or if you don't have a question, but you want to benefit from the questions that other people ask and the answers that you get back from Jack or the rest of us, just give us your email address on one of those cards. So when we put all this information, we'll send it out on an email to you. And if any of you don't have email, speak to me or give me your address, and we'll just copy it and send it to you, because we really do know that this kind of discussion generates a lot of questions.